call upon the Permanent Secretary in the Division of Local Government Administration, responsible for administration, to address.
Thank you very much. Thank you, PPRO, Legal Counsel, directors present here today. Members of the press, you're most welcome, as always, to the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development. This is now going to be tradition, and I think we indicated last time that we will be calling upon the media to help us spread the information around what the government is doing through the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development, and in particular, issues related to CDF. So today's interaction is primarily a follow-up to what happened last time, where we provide an update on CDF, but we also clarify some of the programs or projects that are being undertaken under the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development. So in terms of CDF, we know that the 2026 allocation has increased to 40 million kwacha per constituency. And actually the amount has been going up from 2021 to date. So we know that over the past 3-4 years, government has been committed to ensuring that more resources are allocated towards CDF. But what is the primary objective of CDF? CDF, by now, we should know that it aims to drive local development, to empower communities using a decentralized approach. Now, how do you empower people if you don't give them resources? And that's the question that CDF answers. Not only are systems and mechanisms designed in a way that there's local participation, the systems and mechanisms empower local participation by provision of resources, and we call those resources the Constituency Development Fund. So we wish to give an update today in terms of the allocation that government has promoted around that. So we know, for example, that through this allocation of resources, CDF remains a pragmatic tool for local development at the community level, but when we aggregate the individual success stories, we come up with a macro picture that reflects the significance of CDF in transforming and bringing about progressive lifestyle changes in the local authorities. In terms of the 2025 highlights from the CDF allocations that have been provided, we know that there are wide-ranging projects have been implemented across the country, different communities, using the Constituency Development Fund. We know from the CDF guidelines and the CDF Act itself that the community's voice is amplified through CDF by their participation. The communities themselves determine what projects will come to life, what projects are fit for purpose for their particular context and their particular needs. So in general, there have been a range of infrastructural projects that have been implemented across the country, rehabilitation of schools, the building of schools, health centers, feeder roads, and water reticulation systems. There's been substantial commitment to delivering and implementing presidential directives that are centered on enhancing the Human Development Index. We know that the Human Development Index is a composite index that seeks to measure the progress that we're making, both in terms of economic and material terms, but also the social aspects of it. So not only are we focused on bringing about gains in terms of improved livelihoods through enhancement of income, but we're also looking at the social needs of the different communities. And that's why you see that CDF is an all-encompassing resource that aims to enhance the human development components. We also have implemented empowerment initiatives by provision of grants and loans for youth, women, and small-scale entrepreneurs. So you can already see that CDF is targeted at vulnerable sections of community, and in particular the women and children. But also CDF targets vulnerable economic entities, and in this particular case, we're talking about small-scale entrepreneurs. So by providing the requisite financial resources, we hope that CDF will create a cadre of entrepreneurs at the local level who will then grow into large-scale entrepreneurs over a period of time. But we realize that any society that is not underpinned by an educated citizenry can suffer from wide-ranging social and economic ills. So what CDF has done is that it targets education in a way by providing resources to vulnerable sections of society, people who have productive capacity but lack the economic resource, and then they're supported with resources. So through education, there's a target on vulnerable learners in secondary boarding schools and skills development programs and activities. So very, very quickly from that, you can see that CDF allows citizens to decide how resources will be allocated, how we're going to meet local needs in education, in infrastructure, in healthcare, in water articulation, in order to support a more dignified lifestyle for communities. But there are times when CDF is applied from a macro perspective where, for example, large-scale projects are implemented from the headquarters through the Ministry of Local Government Rural Development. The recent one being the acquisition of ambulances, which have then been delivered to the constituencies. And before that, we know that CDF has been used in a manner that has bolstered the welfare of the communities. So ladies and gentlemen, not long ago, and in particular on the 3rd of October, 2025, we announced as the Ministry of Local Government Rural Development right in this room that 602 million kwacha have been allocated to all the constituencies across the country, averaging around 4 million kwacha per constituency. What this did was that by 3rd of October 2025, over 3.4 billion kwacha was allocated from January this year. Over 3.4 billion kwacha was allocated as CDF funds for the different constituencies across the country. But I'm delighted today to announce to the nation that you can imagine that the 3rd of October, what is the date today? That's how many days apart? About 15 days, about 2 weeks apart. But in the last 2 weeks alone, the Ministry of Finance and National Planning has disbursed over 1 billion kwacha as constituency development fund, in addition to the 602 million that was released by the 3rd of October. So just in the last 2 weeks, we've received an additional 1 billion, 60 million, 713,449 kwacha and 99 and 98 ingwe. And these funds have already been disbursed to all the local authorities across the country, taking into account the resources that they've received from January to date. So local authorities will receive a differentiated amount or differential amount depending on how much money they've received. So this is an administrative tool that we've used in order to encourage utilization of CDF. So administratively, what we've done is that we are naming and shaming local authorities that are not spending money by looking at their bank accounts to establish how much money that they have. And we gave a directive that within 48 hours of receiving money from central government, the local authorities must spend that money on their obligations. And the way that Ministry of Finance is releasing those funds, we can actually tell from the data that utilization of CDF has actually gone up as a result of the administrative systems and mechanisms that we've put in place in order to provide some kind of reward or punitive measure to local authorities that are not using those funds. So we're happy to report that the local authorities are indeed using those funds, and in recognition of the enhanced utilization, Ministry of Finance has also bolstered its release of CDF funds. So you can imagine that in just 3 weeks, over 1.6 billion has been released for CDF in just 3 weeks. So this reflects an enhanced absorption capacity at the local authority level, but it also reflects the success of the administrative tools that we're using to encourage local authorities to make use of those CDF funds. So what we've done is that we're looking at their bank accounts, we're looking at how much money they've spent. Local authorities that have spent less than 25 million are receiving from this allocation an average of around 4.8 million each. Local authorities over 25 million, as a result of the administrative tool that we're using, are receiving an average of around 2.8 million. However, when you look at quality in the release of funds right up to now, so this differential is not a reflection of differential treatment, but it's a tool that we're using in order to achieve equality in the way that funds are being given out. This means that with the 1.06 billion that has been received, it means that from January 2025 to date, 4.9 billion has been released by the Ministry of Finance and National Planning through the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development to support CDF projects across the country. So that's a huge amount of money, 4.9 billion that's been released. But let's note that for 2025, the national budget set aside 5 billion, 625 million, and 71,493 kwacha as the total CDF allocation for the country. So with 4.9 billion already dispersed, it implies that there's 717,371,892 that is yet to be disbursed by the Ministry of Finance in order for us to accomplish what was set out in the budget for this year. So this is only October, and we're therefore reporting a 76% performance rate for CDF utilization. And you can attest to it that what the data shows here is that CDF utilization has gone up, and we see an upward trend. So all the systems and mechanisms that the government has put in place in order to encourage CDF utilization are actually bearing fruit. And this fruit can be measured by a single variable, and this variable is utilization of CDF and the performance of it. I'm therefore confident that the latest disbursement that has been provided to local authorities will be used for the purposes that it's intended, to support the living standards of our people in the different communities that this money is intended to serve. The President has been very emphatic in ensuring that CDF goes right to the grassroots and is spent for the purposes for which it has been created. Let me also take this opportunity, colleagues, in closing on the issue of CDF, to introduce the latest, or basically to update the nation on the latest conversations around cash for work. We have seen in media and different conversations that the cash for work program has been suspended. And I think those are some of the things that have been going up. But I want to clarify that the cash for work program has not been suspended in the strict terms of the word suspended. What has essentially happened is that the cash for work program was a program that was put in place by the government as a response to the drought, the worst drought that affected this country. But there was an announcement and presidential directive that the cash for work program will continue beyond the drought period. But what that meant is that we have to then incorporate districts that were not covered under the drought response program. So there is a transition period moving from selected districts, 84 districts if you remember very well that were drought affected, to covering all the districts across the country. So in this transition period, we are looking at data that essentially is showing us that there were some gaps in the implementation of cash for work. And in addressing those gaps and ensuring that we reconcile our accounts and start on a fresh note, we have a respite period, a period of rest in between. But this is not to say the program has been suspended in strict terms. So we are reconfiguring the guidelines around cash for work to ensure that it's properly targeted to benefit the intended beneficiaries. We are also reconfiguring the cash for work guidelines to ensure that there's a proper grievance redress system in place. And in further reconfiguration, we're ensuring that we avoid any potentiality for double dipping of public resources that arise from such government transfers. Colleagues who are going to benefit from cash for work should not be on any other government program, such as the usual cash transfer benefits through community development. But to avoid that double dipping, there's necessity to ensure that we have consolidated data on the names through the social register. There's also necessity for consultation with communities in order to ensure that we have a comprehensive grievance redress systems that will support that. But let me report that over 1.5 billion was released specifically for the Cash for Work program. Now that's also a very decent amount of money that has been dedicated towards social service through the Ministry of Local Government Rural Development. But in this transition period, there's also a directive to ensure that we adhere to the tenets of a whole of government approach. What does that mean? It means that we're bringing the Ministry of Community Development on board. We're also bringing on board the Office of the Vice President, in particular the Department of Resettlement. We're also bringing on board the Ministry of Finance in order for us to sit on one table and design a comprehensive and robust system that targets the vulnerable communities and ensures that public resources are spent optimally, judiciously, and in a transparent and accountable manner. So there is a balance, therefore, of only 23 million on the current Cash for Work program. So resources have been allocated, reconciliation is underway, and we're making sure that funds target the beneficiaries in an optimal manner. With these few words, I just want to thank you, colleagues, members of the media, for spending time with us this morning. And I would just like to hand over to our Principal Public Relations Officer, Madam Ms. Ali. Thank you very much. This what? So it's basically the entire program, so which means it's everywhere else. However, funds were recently disbursed by the Ministry of Finance and payments are underway. But as payments are underway, we're also making sure that there's a proper reconciliation that ensures that there's no double dipping of funds. So that's a very, very complex administrative task, but we are confident that this is going to be concluded in the shortest possible period of time.
Good morning, sir. In the past, there was fear of substitution of this fund. And now that those that were saying that CDF is not going to jacked up, the other fear we're looking at is the quality of the work that is being done. Is there a proper monitoring mechanism that will ensure that quality work?
I mean, that's an important question. I mean, if you're going to spend money to do work, you don't want to come back and do it because of shoddy works, isn't it? So there is a very strong monitoring system in place, but we are supporting that at central level. If you paid attention, you see that the minister has also come on board and has been moving around the country in order to check on different CDF projects, have conversations with local authorities. But we also recognize that the root of the gaps in implementation, in particular the lack of quality works, could be a result of a capacity deficiency. So we also have streamlined our intervention by ensuring that capacity building initiatives are being implemented. So very recently, we've hosted here at the local level all the provincial engineers across the country to support the monitoring exercise as well. So there's capacity building, there's exchange of data and information, and there's constant checkups as well as spot checks and field visits that the ministry is taking place. So what we do observe is that with improved performance in terms of utilization, we are also anticipating improved performance in terms of quality of works and services that we deliver.
Yes, Paula. The other issue that you heard that CDF, the transparency, their conflict in comparison to the committees that are heading with disbursement programs not transparent. Mostly they are doing people they know, people they are related to, people they are with, sympathy, stuff like that. How are you hoping to manage those bottlenecks? Because it's a handful that is complaining, and a handful that is saying, well, we need CDF to work.
I mean, that's indeed a constant battle in terms of ensuring that implementation is as smooth as you envisage from the plans. Right now, the CDF guidelines are under review. So in reviewing those CDF guidelines, there are all these issues that were put in place, such as grievance redress, the constitution and composition of the Ward Development Committees, as well as the CDFC committees, to be more representatives of the different sections of society. So we hope that with the enhanced CDF guidelines and improved utilization and implementation, we will see a situation where a wider net is cast across the community and capture as many people as possible, and avoid those type of scenarios where, in particular, you would argue that there's a selection of individuals to the detriment of others. But we have to make it more transparent. And I think this is also one of the initiatives, an initiative where we as Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development are actually informing the nation of how much money is going to the different constituents. And once we've informed that, it is incumbent upon all of us as members of our communities to know who are the people that sit in the Ward Development Committees. How do we communicate to them what our desires and wishes are? But through this type of interaction, where data is made available publicly, where data is made available in a transparent manner, where data is made available in a way that holds us public officers accountable, requires us to also take into account that communities must participate and make use of the information that is shared. That's also another important question. And right now, I'm actually coming from a meeting at Ministry of Finance where we are trying to look at the revised guidelines for cash for work, but also under CDF, trying to look at the recovery component of the loans, but in particular for CDF. So there are mechanisms in place right now. For those that are already subscribed, they will receive, such as the bursaries, for example, including the loan situation as well, because those are already approved by the committees. But even as we tighten the mechanism for loan recovery, but inclusion of financial institutions and understanding of what the best practices are across the world, we are hopeful that loan recovery is going to go up. So this is an honest conversation that we're having within ourselves as government, and that's why I was referring to the meeting that I just came back from at the Ministry of Finance.
Job like I Michigan really. There was a serious allegation made by the EFF president, there is a claim that the distribution of CDF only he's saying that only 2% reaches recipients. How true is that, and what percentage
Thank you.
does reach the
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That's an important question. I suppose you're referring to the political conversations that are going on. We are technocrats, so we report data in its factual sense. We provide the data in the way that is provided, which is available for verification. I don't know what the source of this data is. I would like to look at that study. I'd like to interrogate that data to its depth. But as far as we're concerned, we have received funds from Ministry of Finance, just slightly under 4 billion, and we are at 76% performance for this year. So any person who has different data from the one that the government is providing, I would like to look at that data and interrogate it myself. So outside of that conversation, I would like to suggest that the individual in question makes this data available, the methodology that was utilized to arrive at that conclusion, so that it's available for scientific verification and empirical validation. Improvement, indeed. So the administrative intervention that we put in place, the administrative initiative we put in place is one. We are firstly looking into their bank account to establish how much money that they have sitting in there. So when we receive money from Ministry of Finance, we see how much money each particular constituency has in their bank accounts. So constituencies that are above a certain threshold are penalized by foregoing the allocation so that you allocate to the others to the extent that they receive the pressure from the different constituents within the local authorities, within the constituencies themselves. So by naming and shaming them, by looking at the data on allocation, we are saying that all of them now are moving on and spending this money on existing obligations.